Alright, in this video, I want to talk about how you can't force people to believe anything, and you can't force people to go to heaven. But this is an issue that comes up when you're dealing with Catholics. It has a lot to do with how they were raised, where they were forced to believe what they believe. Such as my dad. He grew up in the Catholic Church. He actually had a disability when he was younger, and he was actually raised by nuns, and he was forced to believe what he believed. So when he had me, he was like, I want you to find God on your own. I'm not going to force you into Catholicism the way I was. And that's how I went. Uh, I don't think he was expecting that I would actually find God and that he wouldn't be in the Catholic Church. But that's what he did. And since I wasn't forced to believe the way he was, I was free to actually ask questions and figure things out and actually search and find God. But most Catholic families are not like that. They don't have that kind of freedom of asking questions and actually discussing the things. It's like, no, this is what you have to believe. Now believe it, or else you're ruining the family. You're ruining everything, right? And you're kind of shunned as a black sheep, right? So that's just their mindset. Is like, yeah, you force people to believe, and that's normal. So when you talk about things like the Dark Ages and how the Catholic Church actually forbid the reading of the Bible in your own language, and later on when Catholic priests were reading the Bible, they decided that they wanted to get the Bible out to the common man. They started translating it into German, into English. The Catholic Church would destroy the Bibles and end up imprisoning those people who were doing the translations or who had copies of these Bibles, and they would have them tortured and even put to death, usually burning at the stake. And I talk to Catholics about this, and they'll say, "Oh, well, they forbid the reading of the Bible in their own language because of heresies." And it was like, what heresies were in the Bibles they were reading? Well, there's none, right? They can't say there was any. It's like, oh, because they would interpret it some way differently than the church. And it'd be like, so you can't force them to believe. You can't force people to go to heaven. Let's say the Catholic Church is right. It's the truth. Just because you don't let people read the Bible on their own and interpret it themselves and you force them into Catholicism doesn't make them saved. You think God wants you forcing people to heaven? You think that's how it works? Like, you don't have any other choice. You have to go to heaven. So I'm not going to let you do this, that, the other thing, so that you have to go. And we'll force you into it. No, of course not. So they say the same thing when, oh, they were burning the translations from like a Wycliffe or a Luther. And you're like, oh, because of heresies. Well, what heresies were in their Bibles? None, because they can't tell you any, because there wasn't any. Just like I talked to them today, but you're like, oh, I shouldn't use the King James. What heresies are in it? What false doctrines are in the King James? Well, none. Well, then what's the problem? You see the silliness there. And again, you can't force people to believe. You can't force people to go to heaven. You see, even if you take these people, you put them in jail, and you torture them, and even give them the threat of death. You know, you're not going to bring them to death. It's the threat. And they go, okay, okay, okay. I renounce what I believe, and I follow the Catholic Church. Do you think they really believe, or that they're just trying to save their life? Is that the kind of people you want in your church? Is people that are forced to be there? You're like, oh, look at him. He was preaching all this other stuff, and we beat him into submission, and now look at him. Now he's one of us. Is that really the kind of people you want to be surrounded by? Is people that were forced to be there? Who deep inside, don't believe it, but they're forced to go along with it anyway? Do you really think that's how God works? You don't have the free will to believe what you want, and that he's going to force you to end up coming to his church and being part of it in order for you to be forced to go to heaven and be saved. Really, think about it. Because when I talk to these Catholics, that's the mindset. Be like, yeah, you don't give anybody the choice not to be part of the church. They might lead people astray. So what? All it's going to do is take the people out who never truly believed anyway. Just like John says in his first epistle, that they left us because it was made manifest that they were not of us, or else they would have stayed with us. But instead of just letting them go, you're forcing them in as if, oh, well, I'm protecting the sheep. No, you're forcing people to be your sheep. There's a difference. Because if you're protecting the sheep, you'll say, hey, there's a lion. There's a wolf. And you expose the doctrines. You expose the lies, the errors. You don't force them with threat of punishment of jail and torture and death, where it's no longer about the truth, it's about coercion and intimidation, showing you that the Catholic Church is a power structure that is sustained by its followers. And that's why it doesn't want them to leave, because then it will crumble. Just like any other cult. You can't believe what you want to believe. You got to believe what the cult says. You can't interpret things differently. Look at the Jehovah's Witnesses. If you do something different, they shun you. Right? Just completely disfellowship. That's better than what the Catholic Church does. Right? But they basically do the same thing. Now, I understand where if you're going to have fellowship with fellow believers, you're not going to have fellowship with people who you don't think truly believe or believe false doctrine. That's fine. But then when you're not having your fellowship in worshiping God, that doesn't mean you shun them in the rest of your life. Right? You talk to them and you try to reason with them. That's what God says in the scriptures. Come, let us reason together. He's not forcing you into these things. And if you bring up Old Testament stuff to try to say, oh, look, God forcing things, you would be wrong, because God had a covenant, a contract with the nation of Israel at Mount Sinai that they agreed to. So if they wanted to break away from that covenant, they're breaking the covenant. And if you broke the covenant, there was punishments. So he wasn't forcing them. They were part of a covenant. And if they followed it, they would be blessed. And if they broke it, they would be punished. That was part of the contract that they agreed to. Right? Now, you can't force people to be part of a contract. You can't force people to sign the contract. And if you do, it's not binding, because they were forced to by coercion or threat or torture. And I mean, these things shouldn't have to be said, but they do. And I understand why, and that's because of the way how Catholics were raised. I know because I grew up, my dad's side of the family Catholic, and my wife's family Catholic. I know how it is. I'm not ignorant to it. And I see how the children and grandchildren are treated if they ask questions. Like if they start asking me questions, I can see the nervous look they get when I start telling them things that are not Catholic or opposite of Catholic teachings. and they don't want to say anything in front of me about it because they know I will end up refuting them with the scriptures. So they'll wait until I'm gone and they're alone, and they'll start then coercing the children or grandchild after that. And then all of a sudden they don't ask me questions anymore, which is weird, right? Although they'll be led astray. Well, why don't you refute me in front of them? Rebuke me in front of them and show them the truth. Like if my children were being taught some Catholic doctrine right in front of me, I would correct the person right there. I wouldn't wait until the person left. Be like, no, that's wrong. That's not what the Bible teaches. God teaches this. So you can see the differences there, right? But all in all, just say it one more time. You can't force people to believe something that they don't really believe. You can force them to act in a way contrary to their beliefs. You can force them to act in a way that lines up with your beliefs, but you can't change what they truly believe inside. So, in other words, you can't force people to go to heaven. You can't force people to be saved. You can't force people to truly be part of the church. Because to be part of the church, you truly have to believe. That's something that can't be forced. It's impossible. This just can't be done. Right? So, that's that. Thanks for watching. Take care.